The full cast is expected to return alongside Reardon, including Maiko Nguyen as Dr. Sarah Truong, Kevin Hanchard as Superintendent Joseph Donovan, and Justin Kelly as tech analyst Jesse Mills. And in a twist that adds even more tension to the story, Luke Roberts is also expected to stay in the cast as Detective Mark Hudson. That means this isn't a quiet retcon, where the show pretends the last season never happened. Both detectives are expected to exist in the same world at the same time, which practically guarantees friction, competition, and emotional complexity once filming begins. Sherry White remains showrunner for the series, with Christina Jennings, Scott Garvey, Lisa Porter, John Reardon himself, Kevin Hanchard, and other producers serving as executive producers, which shows just how deeply involved Reardon now is in shaping where this story goes next. And that raises the biggest question hanging over this entire season. After everything that happened, after being pushed out following his recovery, after watching an entire season unfold without him, is John Reardon really going to slide back into this role like nothing ever happened? Or is Season 9 setting up something far more emotional and complicated than a simple happy reunion? Given how openly the show has acknowledged the Belize storyline, and given how directly the season description hints at complicated dilemmas and chain reactions inside the department, it seems clear the writers know they can't just skip past what the audience witnessed. They know fans watched Charlie get erased. They know fans fought to bring him back. And if the show tries to pretend Season 8 barely happened, it risks feeling just as hollow and dismissive as Charlie's original exit did in the first place. Season 9 is expected to premiere on City TV in Canada this fall, continuing the show's long-standing pattern of returning with new seasons on a fairly consistent yearly rhythm. For international audiences, the rollout typically follows a bit later, with the show historically reaching other territories and streaming platforms in the months after its Canadian premiere. If that pattern holds again this year, fans outside Canada should expect a staggered release rather than everything arriving at once. As for a full trailer, nothing has been officially confirmed yet, beyond the short teaser clip that came with the Season 9 announcement. But given how much attention this reversal has already generated across social media and entertainment news, it would be genuinely surprising if the network didn't lean into a full-length trailer as the premiere date gets closer. Shows rarely get a second chance to publicly correct a mistake this visibly, and when they do, they tend to market it hard, because this isn't just another season of a procedural drama. This is being treated internally as something closer to a redemption story for the show itself. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting for anyone trying to predict how this actually plays out once cameras start rolling. Charlie's return isn't happening in a vacuum. He's stepping back into a department that adjusted without him, a dog that spent an entire season bonding with someone else, and a fan base that's going to watch every single scene. Comparing this version of the show frame by frame to what it used to be before everything fell apart, that's an enormous amount of pressure for one season to carry. If the writing leans into that tension honestly, showing real friction, real adjustment, and a Rex who doesn't just conveniently forget the last several months, the moment Charlie walks back through the door, this could end up being one of the strongest and most emotionally rewarding seasons the show has ever produced, because it would actually earn the payoff instead of handing it to viewers for free. But if the show rushes the reunion, glosses over the tension, and pretends Season 8 barely happened, that risks feeling just as hollow and manipulative as Charlie's exit felt in the first place. Fans didn't fight this hard just to get a rushed, shallow reunion. They fought for something that actually respects everything Charlie, Rex, and the audience went through together. Either way, one thing is undeniably clear at this point. This has stopped being just a police procedural about a detective and his dog solving cases in Newfoundland. This has become a rare example of what happens when a fan base refuses to quietly accept a decision they believe was wrong, and a network actually listens instead of digging in and defending a mistake for years. Whether you view this as a genuine, heartfelt correction from the people running the show, or as a response driven purely by falling engagement numbers and sustained public pressure, the end result is exactly the same. Charlie Hudson is coming back. John Reardon is back in the role that defined his career on this series. And Season 9 now has a real chance to either fully repair what was broken between this show and its audience, or expose just how difficult it truly is to undo a decision like this once it's already been made and lived with for an entire season. So when Season 9 finally premieres this fall, the real story isn't going to be the case of the week, no matter how well written it turns out to be. The real story is going to be whether Charlie and Rex can genuinely feel like they never left each other's side at all, or whether some things, once broken publicly and painfully in front of millions of fans, simply don't go back to the way they used to be, no matter how badly everyone involved wants them to. To really understand why this comeback hits as hard as it does, you have to understand who John Reardon actually is, and how much of his life has quietly been built around this character before any of the cancer news ever broke. Reardon didn't stumble into acting by accident. He continued in the role and worked as an executive producer on the show from Season 4 until midway through Season 7, which means long before fans ever knew his name was in danger of being written out of the story. He was already sitting in the rooms where decisions about Charlie and Rex's future were being made. That's not a small detail. That's someone who had creative ownership over the character, not just a paycheck tied to a script. Born in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Reardon trained in theater in Dublin and later studied improv comedy with Second City in both Los Angeles and Toronto, building a foundation that eventually led him through years of Canadian television before Hudson Rex ever existed. He had already built a name for himself playing a bush pilot on the CBC series Arctic Air and taking on a recurring role in the sci-fi drama Continuum. So by the time Hudson Rex came along in 2019, he wasn't some unknown actor getting his first big break. He was a seasoned performer stepping into a role that would end up defining the rest of his career. And that's part of what makes the way he was pushed out feel so much heavier. This wasn't a rookie getting replaced after one rocky season. This was a man who had spent years on camera and behind the scenes shaping a character from the ground up, only to be told the show no longer wanted him in it. What made the bond between Charlie and Rex feel so believable on screen wasn't just good writing. Reardon has talked about how the connection between the two characters was built on the idea that Hudson was someone searching for companionship, and Rex was a dog who had lost his original handler in the line of duty, and the two of them found something in each other that neither one had anymore. That emotional foundation is exactly why audiences reacted the way they did when the show tried to swap it out for a brand new pairing overnight. You can write a new detective. You can hire a great actor to play him. But you can't fake 7 seasons of history in a single premiere. And that's exactly what Season 8 tried to do. It's also worth remembering just how personal this character became for Reardon off camera, not just on it. Beyond acting, he has spoken about his long-standing commitment to animal advocacy, something that lines up almost too perfectly with a role built entirely around the relationship between a man and his working dog. That's not something you can manufacture for publicity. It's the kind of detail that explains why, when Reardon lost the role, it didn't just look like a business decision from the outside. It looked personal, because for him, it likely was. Now let's talk about what actually happened medically, because this part of the story matters more than most casual viewers probably realized in real time. Reardon didn't reveal his diagnosis to the public while it was happening. He revealed it much later, after the fact, once Season 8 had already premiered without him, and fans were left confused about why Charlie had vanished. He had been diagnosed with tonsil cancer, and rather than turning that into a storyline for sympathy or using it to control the public narrative around his absence, he stepped away quietly, focused on his treatment, and let the show continue without drawing attention to what he was actually dealing with behind the scenes. That is not a small sacrifice. Plenty of actors in his position would have used a cancer diagnosis as leverage, as a way to guarantee sympathy from fans and pressure on the network to keep them in the role no matter what. Reardon didn't do that. He handled it privately, finished his treatment, got the all clear from doctors, and then found out the show had already moved on without telling him directly that his 7 years on the series were over. That sequence of events is what turned this from a simple cast change into something that felt like a genuine betrayal to longtime viewers. Because here's the thing people kept coming back to once the details came out. This wasn't a situation where an actor asked for more money and got replaced when negotiations fell apart. This wasn't an actor who wanted to leave for a different project, and the show simply moved forward without him. This was a man who got sick, protected the show by staying quiet about it, did everything right, and still ended up being the one who paid the price. When you frame it that way, it's not hard to understand why fans reacted as intensely as they did. It's also worth sitting with just how rare this kind of fan reaction actually is in the streaming era. Shows get canceled constantly. Characters get recast all the time. Most of the time, audiences complain for a week or two online, and then move on to the next thing streaming platforms throw at them. What happened with Hudson and Rex was different, and it says something about how deeply invested this particular fan base had become in this particular relationship between one man and one dog. People weren't just annoyed that a character was gone. They felt like something real had been taken away from them without warning or explanation. And that emotional response is what actually translated into sustained pressure instead of a passing wave of complaints. It's one thing for people to post angry comments for a few days. It's a completely different thing for that anger to hold steady for an entire season, strong enough to show up in falling engagement numbers, strong enough to make fans spend their own money on newspaper ads, and strong enough to eventually force a network that had already publicly committed to a new direction to reverse course entirely. That almost never happens, and when it does happen, it usually means the emotional stakes were much higher than the network initially understood. Now, Reardon steps back into a role that has already lived through its own version of a death and resurrection. And that context is going to follow every single scene he's in during Season 9. Every moment where Charlie interacts with Rex is going to be measured against what fans went through during the year he was gone. Every conversation between Charlie and Mark Hudson is going to be read as a reflection of the real tension between the actor who built this character and the actor who was brought in to replace him. That's an unusual amount of weight for a procedural drama to carry. But it's also exactly why this comeback has generated so much more attention than a typical cast change ever would. This isn't just John Reardon returning to a job. This is a very public correction of a mistake that played out in front of millions of people. And everyone involved knows the audience is going to be watching for whether the show actually earns that correction or just papers over it for the sake of good publicity. What most casual viewers don't fully realize is that Hudson and Rex wasn't just dealing with one crisis behind the scenes during this stretch. It was dealing with two at almost the exact same time. And that context makes everything that happened afterward even harder to watch in hindsight. Partway through filming Season 7, the German Shepherd, who had played Rex since the very beginning, a dog named Diesel, suffered a burst spleen while the show was in production. The diagnosis that followed was late-stage cancer, and according to the show's dog trainer and executive producer Sherry Davis, the disease progressed quickly. Diesel didn't survive. He died in August of 2024, in the middle of filming the very season where Charlie Hudson was also fighting his own battle with cancer, even though the news of Diesel's passing wasn't made public until months later. In February of 2025. Think about what that actually means. While John Reardon was privately going through cancer treatment, the dog who had been his on-screen partner for 6 full seasons, the one who built that legendary bond with Charlie that fans fell in love with, was also dying, in real time, during the exact same production stretch. 2 of the show's core pillars, the human lead and the canine lead, were both fighting for their lives during the same season. And audiences at home had no idea any of it was happening until long after the fact. Fans who noticed something felt different about Rex. During that stretch of episodes weren't imagining it. Longtime viewers later said online that Rex simply didn't seem like himself anymore, that something felt off, without knowing that the dog they were watching wasn't actually the same one they had followed for years. Diesel's nephews, 2 dogs named Dylan and Dante, along with a 3rd relative named Dreamer used for stunt work, quietly stepped into the role starting partway through season 7, and the show continued forward without ever pausing to explain what had really happened. That's an extraordinary amount of loss and disruption happening behind the camera, while the show kept airing episode after episode like nothing was wrong. And this is exactly what makes the decision to push Reardon out afterward sting even more. This wasn't a show operating from a position of stability that decided to shake things up for creative reasons. This was a production that had just quietly survived the death of its beloved canine star and the serious illness of its human lead, both during the same production cycle. And instead of using season 8 as a moment to lean into everything the show and its cast had just been through together, the network chose to erase the human half of that partnership entirely and start over with someone new. If you're a longtime fan piecing all of this together, it doesn't read as a simple, creative refresh. It reads as a show that had already been through real loss behind the scenes, and then chose to inflict another loss on its audience on top of it, this time by choice rather than circumstance. That's the deeper reason the Backlash hit as hard as it did. Fans weren't just upset about losing a character. Many of them had already spent an entire season quietly mourning a dog they loved without even knowing it, adjusting to subtle differences they couldn't quite explain. And then they were asked to accept losing the human half of that partnership too, all within the space of about a year. There's only so much change an audience can absorb before they stop trusting the people making decisions about a show they've invested years of their lives into. Now, with all of that in mind, think about what season 9 is actually walking into. This isn't just Charlie Hudson coming back to a job. It's a returning actor stepping back onto a set that has already been through profound loss, working alongside a dog that isn't technically the same performer who originated the role years ago, all while trying to rebuild a bond with viewers who watch the show absorb hit after hit without much acknowledgement or closure. That's an enormous amount of emotional weight for one season of television to carry, and it raises a question that goes beyond simple plot mechanics. Will season 9 actually address any of this directly, or will it quietly move forward the same way the show has moved forward through every previous disruption, treating each transition as something to work around rather than something to sit with? Given how openly the show has already leaned into acknowledging Charlie's absence through the Belize storyline, and given how directly Reardon himself has spoken publicly about not wanting to leave in the first place, there's reason to believe the writers understand they can't keep pretending nothing happened. But dogs aging out of demanding physical roles, actors recovering from serious illness, and a production that has now survived 2 major real-world crises back-to-back, all of that creates a show walking into its 9th season, carrying more real history than almost any other procedural on television right now. Most cop shows can recast a character and audiences barely blink, because most cop shows aren't built around a relationship that took years to earn on screen. Hudson Rex was different from the start, precisely because the emotional core wasn't the crime solving, it was the partnership. And partnerships built slowly over time are exactly the kind of thing that can't simply be swapped out and expected to feel the same. That's the tightrope season 9 has to walk. It has to bring Charlie back in a way that respects everything the show has quietly survived, without turning the whole season into a grief-driven slog that forgets it's still supposed to be an entertaining crime procedural at its core. It has to give Rex, in whatever form he now takes, with a new generation of dogs carrying the role forward, a believable reason to reconnect with Charlie after bonding with someone else for an entire season. And it has to do all of this while still delivering the case of the week structure that built the show's audience across more than 100 countries in the first place. That's not a small ask for 12 episodes. But if there's one thing this entire saga has already proven, it's that this particular audience isn't interested in a show that takes the easy way out. They proved that when they refused to quietly accept Charlie's exit. They proved it again when they kept the pressure on for an entire season instead of moving on to something else. And now, they're going to expect the same level of honesty from the story itself, watching closely to see whether season 9 actually earns its emotional reunion or simply rushes through it to get back to solving crimes as fast as possible.